You've got to get up pretty early in the morning to speak to America's hardworking farmers and food producers. We should know. FLM Harvest is a strategic, full-service creative consultancy proud to reach more farmers, farmer boards, and food and commodity associations than any agency in the country. And we understand omni-channel as well as we understand the journey from field to fork. Most importantly, we connect clients to the audiences that matter to them.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. this week, we had a pair of trade hearings featuring the Trump administration's top trade official, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. On Tuesday, he was before the Senate Finance Committee. On Wednesday, he was before the House Ways and Means Committee. So both committees with jurisdiction over trade, hearing from arguably the second most important person in the administration on trade policy, with a pretty obvious choice being the first. But what we heard this week from Representative from USTR Lighthizer had a lot to do with USMCA, had a lot to do with China and Japan. And Phil, it was kind of interesting. A lot of his comments regarding the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement really tied into kind of bending over backwards to praise House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
He did, and that's because she has done something that was very significant from his standpoint in terms of getting the agreement across the finish line in the House, and that was to appoint a working group, a small working group, to meet with him to work out a deal that would satisfy the Democrats on their key issues. The three key issues were enforcing labor standards and environmental standards, and making sure that the agreement would not keep Congress from doing things to reduce drug prices. And so by having a smaller group that he can work with, it makes it easier for him to work out a deal. Even Democrats were saying, over in the House, were saying it was hard for him to get a read on what exactly would satisfy Democrats, because they were so all over the place in terms of what they wanted. So that was a significant move. That group met for the first time Wednesday night. And we'll see. Next few weeks are going to be really critical.
And he expressed a lot of confidence that he would be able to meet with this working group and with House Democrats more broadly and iron out some of these labor and environmental provisions. I think his phrasing was he could get this worked out in half a day. I mean, he seems to have some either confidence in his abilities or confidence in how close they actually might be to getting over the hump with this deal.
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
He spent, it's fair to say, on both the days of these hearings in the Senate, again on the House. Of course, the Ways and Means Committee in the House is controlled by Democrats, but he spent much of his time, his focus clearly was on appealing to Democrats. He wasted no effort, or I should say he spent a lot lot of effort actually in trashing NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, blaming it for business outsourcing to Mexico. Obviously music to the ears of many of the Democrats. But also, as you say, talking about how he wanted to address their concerns and how he thought he could work them out. At one point over in the Senate Finance Committee, he told a Democrat that that she was going to be happy with what he was able to work out in terms of enforcing labor standards.
And so another thing to note this week in terms of trade policy, we did see a presidential tweet from President Donald Trump saying that he had spoken with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and they do plan to meet at next week's G20 summit. A lot of ag groups obviously looking for some kind of movement in the U.S.-China negotiations that have kind of stalled here in recent weeks, looking for some kind of movement and potential resolution. And a lot of folks hoping that that's the meeting that kind of breaks the logjam and gets folks finally talking and potentially agreeing to some kind of resolution there.
Yeah, going back to Lighthizer, he did address this. He was pushed on what could come out of this, and the most that members could get out of him is that the administration was hopeful. He also wanted to talk a little more about Japan. He He does plan to have a meeting with his Japanese counterpart on the sidelines of that G20 summit, and he indicated that it is a high priority of the administration to work out a deal with Japan on agricultural trade in the next few months ahead of dealing with other issues. He talked about that at some length.
So obviously a lot to follow out of those hearings. I encourage you to stop by our website and check out some of the coverage that we've had on some of the discussions that have been on trade on Capitol Hill here this week. Another couple of articles that we have on our website deal with an announcement from the Department of Agriculture this week. It's something that a lot of folks have been calling for a while now, and that is that USDA is going to allow producers who plant a cover crop on prevented planting acres to hay and graze and haylage and baleage and silage that cover crop beginning on September 1st, which is 2 months earlier than was previously set. It was always a November 1st deadline until some calls for some flexibility this year. We've seen some legislation introduced to potentially codify that legislatively, but USDA going ahead, Phil, with the saying it has the authority to do it on its own and moving that date up to September 1st.
Yeah, a lot of pressure from the Hill for them to do that. I think the bill was a part of that. That obviously is going to provide a lot of relief, not just to the farmers who are struggling really struggled mightily across the Midwest to get their crops in, but also to a lot of dairy producers who've been concerned about lack of feed already and worried about this fall, what's going to happen this fall.
So something to watch here in the next couple of weeks, because not to be too curt about this, but to have a cover crop you can do something with in September, it probably needs to be planted in June and July, and there's still quite a few acres out there that you couldn't even get a cover crop in the ground on right now. And so that's another thing to pay attention to, is just how many acres are going to be able to take advantage of this exemption that the department has opted to provide here this week. But as always, lots of things going on in the wide world of farm policy. Just want to summarize some kind of the highlights here for you in this video. Would encourage you to take a stop by agripulse.com for a little bit deeper dive into the issues that are affecting farm and rural policy. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.